William and Sophia were known far and wide as one of the wealthiest couples in Lagos. They lived in a mansion so grand that people would stop to admire its towering gates and shining windows. Their wealth was the stuff of legends, but behind the marble walls of their mansion, things were far from perfect. William and Sophia had been married for 15 long years, but it wasn't love that brought them together. Their marriage was arranged by their wealthy families to strengthen business ties, and from the beginning, they treated their union as a contract more than a relationship. Both of them were proud, stubborn, and unwilling to compromise. They each believed they were better than the other, and neither was willing to back down. To the outside world, they appeared to be the perfect couple, but inside their home, they barely spoke, and when they did, it was always to argue. The real source of conflict, however, began when William's family started pressuring him for something only he could provide: an heir. They wanted a child to carry on the family name, someone to inherit the vast wealth and empire they had built. William, too, began to feel the weight of the expectation. He had everything: money, power, and a beautiful wife. But without a child, his family's legacy felt incomplete. One night, while sitting in the quiet, cold dining room, William gathered the courage to ask Sophia about having children. She had been avoiding the topic for years, and now, at nearly 40 years old, it was becoming urgent. "Sophia," William began, his voice thick with the weight of the conversation he dreaded, "it's been 15 years. My family is constantly asking when we'll have a child. I think it's time." Sophia, who was idly flipping through a fashion magazine, barely looked up. "A child? Now? Why should I go through all that stress just to ruin my body?" she scoffed. "I want to maintain my figure. I worked hard for this. I'm not about to let pregnancy change that." William was stunned by her cold response. "But we need an heir, Sophia. You know how important it is for the family. Everyone expects us to "Who cares what everyone expects?" Sophia interrupted, glaring at him. "Do you think I want to ruin my body just because your family wants a baby? I'm not a fool. I like how I look, and I want to keep it that way." William's frustration grew. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "You care more about your appearance than the future of this family? I can't believe this." Sophia rose from her chair, her eyes narrowing in anger. "Don't raise your voice at me, William. I didn't marry you for love. I married you for wealth, just like you married me for status. If you want children so badly, go find someone else to carry them. I'm not interested." The coldness in Sophia's words was like a slap in the face. William stood there, speechless, as she stormed off to her separate bedroom. It was no secret that they hadn't shared the same room in years. Their marriage was nothing more than a formality, an arrangement to keep up appearances. For the next few weeks, the silence between them grew thicker. William was filled with anger and frustration, while Sophia remained indifferent. She spent her days shopping, attending parties, and flaunting her wealth to anyone who would listen. She cared little for the idea of family, motherhood, or the pressures that weighed on William's shoulders. In the evenings, William would leave the house, finding comfort in the arms of other women. He justified his actions by telling himself that Sophia didn't care about him, so why should he care about her? Meanwhile, Sophia did the same. She had her own affairs, her own secrets, and she made no effort to hide them. Their loveless marriage became a quiet battlefield, both of them pretending not to notice how far they had drifted from each other. They were two strangers, bound only by wealth and pride, living under the same roof, but in completely different worlds. As the pressure mounted on William to produce an heir, his frustration turned into desperation. His family wouldn't stop asking, and he could no longer hide behind excuses. Yet every time he tried to bring up the subject with Sophia, it ended in a fight. She was adamant. She had no desire to have children and was perfectly happy maintaining her figure and her luxurious lifestyle. One evening, after another argument, William found himself standing alone in the grand, empty living room of their mansion. He looked around at the vast space, the expensive furniture, the crystal chandeliers and the marble floors, and it all felt meaningless. What was the point of all this wealth if there was no one to share it with? No children to pass it on to, no love to make it feel like a home? Sophia never decided that she did not want to be dealing with William anyone, as he had begun to be irritating her, so she hired a new maid who would help her convey any message she wanted to send him. One hot afternoon, while flipping through applications sent by the housekeeping agency, Sophia's eyes landed on the name Emily. The resume was simple. Emily was a young woman from a poor background, no impressive qualifications, but she had experience working as a housemaid in other wealthy homes. "She'll do," Sophia said, tossing Emily's application aside as she instructed her personal assistant to call and hire her. A few days later, Emily arrived. She was a quiet, unassuming young woman, barely 22 years old, with soft features and wide, nervous eyes. Her skin was a deep brown, her hair always tied back in a neat bun, and she dressed in simple clothes that spoke of her modest upbringing. Despite her humble appearance, she had an air of determination about her, a quiet strength that Sophia didn't notice at first, but would come to envy later. Sophia didn't waste any time introducing Emily to her duties. The young maid was responsible for cleaning her room and her husband's room. Since the couple no longer spoke directly to one another, Emily became the bridge between them. Whenever Sophia needed to communicate with William, she would send Emily a message, and the same went for William, who used Emily to relay messages to his wife. At first, Emily was just grateful for the job. She had been out of work for months, and this opportunity was a blessing, even though the mansion's cold, tense atmosphere made her uneasy. More importantly, the money from this job would help her sick mother, who was in the hospital battling an illness that required expensive treatment. For Emily, failure was not an option. She needed to keep this job, no matter what. Emily worked tirelessly to meet the couple's impossible standards. Sophia barely acknowledged her presence, except to bark orders or hand her lists of things to buy. Emily's mornings were spent polishing the marble floors, dusting the grand chandeliers, and ensuring Sophia's room remained perfectly pristine. William, on the other hand, was different. Unlike Sophia, who treated Emily like a shadow, William often watched her as she worked, his eyes following her as she moved through the rooms. At first, Emily didn't notice his lingering stares, too focused on her tasks. But soon, she began to feel his presence more keenly. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at her, something that made her skin crawl. One evening, as Emily was cleaning William's room, he appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a smirk on his face. "You've been doing a good job, Emily," William said, his voice low and smooth. "The house hasn't looked this good in a long time." Emily paused, wiping her hands on her apron as she stood nervously by the bed. "Thank you, sir. I'm just doing my best." William stepped into the room, his eyes still fixed on her. "You know, I appreciate hard work. Not everyone in this house does. It's nice to have someone who listens and gets things done." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She forced a smile, trying to remain polite. "I'm glad I could help." But William didn't leave. He moved closer, his presence filling the room. "You're a good girl, Emily. You deserve to be treated well. Don't let anyone here make you feel less than that." Emily's heart raced. She didn't know how to respond, so she mumbled something about needing to finish her work and hurried out of the room as quickly as possible. From that moment on, she made every effort to avoid being alone with William, but it wasn't always easy. He had a way of finding her, of cornering her when Sophia wasn't around. One night, while the house was quiet and Sophia was away on another trip, William caught Emily alone in the kitchen. He approached her, his footsteps soft but deliberate. "Emily," he said, his voice sending a shiver down her spine. She turned to face him, trying to hide her fear. "You don't have to be afraid of me. I just want to talk." But his intentions were far from innocent. Before Emily could react, William grabbed her arm, his grip firm and unrelenting. The fear she had been trying to push away now consumed her, but no matter how much she struggled, she couldn't break free. That night, William raped Emily, leaving her broken and terrified. Afterward, William threatened her, his voice cold and menacing. "If you tell anyone about this, you'll regret it. I'll make sure you lose this job, and with my influence, I'll make sure you never work anywhere else. You might even find yourself in jail." Emily, devastated and frightened for her life, had no choice but to keep silent. She knew that without this job, her mother's treatment would stop, and she couldn't afford to let that happen. So she swallowed her pain, buried her shame, and went back to work as though nothing had happened. Emily's world seemed to collapse around her when she discovered she was pregnant. She sat alone in her tiny room, staring at the small bump that was beginning to form on her belly, wondering how her life had spiraled so terribly out of control. The terror of the situation weighed heavily on her. She was pregnant, with the child of the man who had violated her, and there was no way to hide it forever. What was she going to do? She'd tried to go about her duties as normal, but the stress of keeping her secret hidden was overwhelming. Every time William glanced her way, her heart raced, terrified that he would somehow know she hadn't yet done what he demanded. Get rid of the baby. He hadn't noticed yet, and for that Emily was grateful, but she knew it was only a matter of time before he did. One evening, when Emily could no longer bear the weight of her burden, she gathered the courage to confront William. She waited until Sophia was out of the house, as she often was these days, off attending to her social circles. Emily entered William's office, her hands trembling, her voice barely a whisper as she said, "Sir, I need to talk to you." William barely looked up from his desk, uninterested in what he assumed was another trivial matter. "What is it, Emily?" he asked, annoyance seeping into his voice. And taking a deep breath, Emily finally spoke the words she had been dreading. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, William didn't respond, his expression blank, as if he hadn't quite heard her. But then his face twisted in anger. "What did you say?" Emily's knees felt weak, but she forced herself to stand tall. "I'm pregnant. I've been to the doctor, and it's too late to—" Before she could finish her sentence, William slammed his fist down on the table, his eyes blazing with fury. "You were supposed to take care of this. I gave you money to get rid of it. How could you let this happen?" Emily flinched at his outburst. "I tried, but the doctor said it's too far along. I could die if I try to remove it now." For a brief moment, William's anger faltered, replaced by a cold indifference. "You should have been more careful. You should have done something sooner." He stood up from his chair, towering over Emily. "I don't want this child, do you hear me? I don't care what happens to you, but you will not drag me into your mess. My family will never accept a child from a nobody like you." Emily's heart shattered. The man who had assaulted her was now telling her that her baby, his baby, was nothing to him. She had expected as much, but hearing it from his lips made it all the more devastating. "I can't get rid of it now," Emily said, her voice shaking. "It's too late. The doctor said it could kill me." William narrowed his eyes, his face hardening with contempt. "That's not my problem, Emily. But I'm warning you. If you tell anyone, especially Sophia, about this, you'll regret it. I'll destroy you. You'll never work again, and I'll make sure your life becomes a living nightmare." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, but she nodded silently, knowing she was trapped. She had no choice but to endure this alone.